Dr. Samantha Monson is our speaker tonight, and Scott mentioned that she is a psychologist, she is a mom, she's an adult living with CF who's extremely active in the community, and I think has a lot of really exciting things to share with us about her journey and her experiences, both personally and professionally. And I think we all are really excited to hear from you, Sam. And before you start, I just want to mention to everybody, Sam and I are really hoping that this can be informal and interactive. So she has a video and then she's going to talk. I don't even know if she has slides, but please put comments and questions in the chat. Judy and I are going to try to read questions when Sam's done so that we can have a discussion and a Q&A. And then we have some other prompting questions if folks are quiet, but otherwise, take it away, Sam. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you so much. And for all of the parents and CF patients, I know this is a really busy time of year. Thank you for carving this time out. Hopefully connecting with the CF care team and kind of being mindful and thinking about how other people's CF journeys, such as myself, might help yours. Hopefully by carving out this little chunk, something will benefit your well-being in one way or another. So, and like Dr. Muther said, please, I purposely am making this very informal. I'm used to giving very academic presentations and actively resisted that, but I couldn't quite not have PowerPoints. So couldn't quite let go. But please, you can chat questions. We can chat at the end, but if you have something as we're going through, you're welcome to bring it up as well. So I'm going to just go through a bit about me. And as I share my story, I'm going to share just some pieces that I want to put out there for your consideration and how they might play into your life or how you might be able to think about them and maybe implement some of these things. Some will resonate, some will not, but hopefully as we go across all of these different pieces, there'll be something that might be helpful. But before we start, some disclaimers. So first, I'm old. I am 40, and that is old for CF. And that is also really important to know because if you were born with CF and you're still at a CF care center for kids, you are living a different CF than I had when I was your age. It looked really different. And I'll talk a little more about that. But I think that's important to keep in mind. I'm a psychologist. I work at Denver Health, a health psychologist. But tonight I'm really talking more as a CF patient. You have an amazing behavioral health team with social workers and psychologists. So you don't need me for that, but I'm happy to lend the CF patient perspective. And of course, weave in some mental health pieces because I think about that quite a bit. In my opinion, this could be debated and may not be true across the board, but in my opinion, I think when it comes to CF, being a CF parent, meaning having a child with CF, is harder than being a CF patient. This comes from, obviously, I have never parented a child with CF, or maybe not obviously, you don't know my whole story, but I have not parented a child with CF, but being a mom myself, and when my kids have had health issues that have come up, and then comparing that to what I know my parents went through, I feel pretty confident in saying this. So I just want to put that out there because I think it's an important piece to be sure if you're a parent that you're giving yourself credit for how hard this is and how rewarding and wonderful, but also how hard. Last thing, I don't think it's possible to cope with CF in isolation. And CF is such a weird disease that it sort of creates this isolation. Like, I wore a mask on an airplane before masks were a thing. I, don't get together with other CF patients. You can't connect with people around CF. And so you have to get creative and use the virtual space and figure out how you can really have a community who supports you in the CF piece. And if someone doesn't have CF, but you can still talk with them really honestly, or if it's a friend who has kids who are a similar age and you can talk with them honestly and not sugarcoat it, that's the type of connection that I'm talking about. I think it's so, so, so important. So those are my disclaimers and my biases. I have others, of course, but I think those are the top ones. So first, I feel like whenever you hear the story of someone with CF, you kind of go like, how applicable is this to me? So I'm going to share a little bit about my biology and my CF because I do think that that's relevant. So I was born in 1981. I was not diagnosed with CF until I was 18 months old, and it was because I was having significant issues gaining weight. And so I was diagnosed as having failure to thrive, and ultimately it was found out that I had CF. This was before newborn screening. And my mutation is that I am homozygous Delta F 508. So I have the most common CF mutation. I also have a sister who's 3 years younger who has CF. And then I have a sister who is 11 years younger, and she is not even a CF carrier. So with the way the Punnett square goes, my parents really hit the least likely options: 2 daughters with CF and 1 who's not even a CF carrier. I, despite having the most common mutation, have had the, I think, combination of good fortune and have worked hard to be really healthy. The cards that you're dealt with CF are not within your control. Some of your CF behaviors are not within your control. If you're the parent, you can't control your child's CF behaviors. But the way it shook out for me is that I'm quite healthy. So the early years. So I'm going to kind of walk through my CF story in chronological order. But instead of like telling you a lot of stories about like this was me in the early years, I'm going to hopefully pull out some threads that I think will be useful or food for thought. So the first is, I think in the early years, I obviously don't remember this, the time of my diagnosis and the first, preschool years, for example, with CF. So a lot of what I know about these early years and the initial adjustment to CF for a family is in the stories and the way that my parents have told this. And I think the thing that stands out is when CF enters your family system, you have to figure out, how are we going to cope? Like, what are we going to do? And sometimes I think that it can be so, you can kind of say, well, we're just going to live with this. Like, we're just going to go on. And I think sometimes it's important to step back and say, like, no. How are we going to cope with this particular thing? Like, what are we going to do to keep ourselves mentally healthy, to keep our family functioning the way we want? How can we support well-being? And for my family, my parents got really involved with the CF Foundation. One of the primary ways they coped is they decided they wanted to raise a ton of money. When I was born, there were no treatments specifically for CF. The CF gene had not been discovered. So there were huge, huge needs in terms of science. And there, of course, still are. But my parents threw themselves in. They helped form a CF chapter in Colorado Springs, where I was born. They rallied their friends around this and started having events. So one of the ways they coped was by saying, we're going to be really involved with the foundation. And I think that was incredibly, incredibly helpful for them. It also helped them kind of rally a community, that piece I mentioned about don't operate in isolation. The other thing that they did, starting from really early on, was, and I think that they were somewhat ahead of their time in this, because the stigma of mental health has always been so thick, but I would like to think it's improving a bit as we move forward. But mental health and mental health treatment was always a part of the way that they coped. So our family always accessed mental health providers as things would happen, CF events, exacerbations and that kind of thing would happen. So fundraising and taking care of mental health. And then the other piece, and this started when I was young, but continued, one of the ways that I cope is by being really involved in CF research. So participating in clinical trials has always felt really important and empowering to me. And my parents did that as well, as part of being on, having us be on the cutting edge of science. So those were 3 pieces that were really helpful in our family. So then we move into kind of elementary school. And the thing that really comes up for me in the elementary years is CF really impacts attachment and the way that family relationships function. And so for me, that really looked like a very close attachment to my parents in a way that as I got older was less and less developmentally appropriate. So I could not do sleepovers at all. I worried about being away from my parents at all, even as my peers were starting to go to summer camps and things like that. And so I think my point in this is that I think CF can affect your family in a lot of ways, and to be just mindful of what that looks like, but also to know that it's okay. I mean, CF is a big enough deal that if it feels like your family looks a little bit different because of that, that's okay. And we always talked really openly about it, and I think that was really helpful, but it definitely made those attachments to my parents different, partly because they were giving me all my pills and doing all my treatments and taking me out to all of my appointments. So whereas as kids grow through the elementary years, you don't need your parents as much for quote, like day-to-day survival. But for me, it still felt very much like I actually need them for day-to-day survival to make sure I can digest my food and keep my airways clear and all of that kind of thing. I think, compliance or adherence in CF is a really significant issue that comes up. And one of the ways that I think my parents helped my sister and I through the adherence periods that were hard were to really treat that like chores. And I think this is like a pretty concrete piece of advice that I feel like is helpful. So, we weren't expected to like empty the dishwasher or do our laundry as our friends might be. They would say, you have to do treatment and you have to take the pills. And so that was really built into, this is an extra responsibility, just like chores would be. And that I think helped us sort of conceptualize it as important, but also feeling like we didn't have to do perhaps all the other things. So made it a little bit easier, all those treatments and everything to fit in. Getting into the teen years, I think it made me really realize the trauma that CF presents. And this looks really different across different patients and family stories. But when I got into my teen years, I had a couple of really hard and scary hospitalizations under my belt. And I started having traumatic social experiences. Like I can remember in middle school, someone saw my bottle of enzymes in my locker and they grabbed the bottle and threw it down the hall, like during passing period. And I still remember like all the pills going everywhere and just feeling like I needed to like melt into the floor. And so I think that I really think of CF as a trauma for a family. And part of that is part of my reason to bring that up is that's why it's so important to access mental health treatment, to have the screeners that you just heard about, all of these things, because some people experience a trauma and their resilience skates them through and they have very little impact from it, but many people have some impact. And the earlier you catch it and realize it, the more support you can get and the more you can kind of get back on track. But my teen years are really when I started realizing the impact that these different CF pieces had on me and had on my parents. When I went to college is this big looming transition for CF patients, right? Like you're living under your parents' roof and then you go to college and it's like, oh gosh, I remember my parents talking with me about like, how are you going to keep doing VEST? How are you going to do your NEBs? What are you going to do like in the cafeteria? You're going to take your enzymes in your pocket or like, so they kind of help me problem solve all these things. But I know, and I can appreciate as a parent now, how scary it must have been, sending your child with these health needs off into the world and into this new level of independence. And this is also when I transitioned from care at Children's to care at National Jewish. And at first that transition did not go well. And I'm old. So I was in the cohort of patients where the CF Adult Center was still new-ish. There weren't volumes of adult patients. And so it was a hard transition because I had really had essentially two doctors for my whole life who very much were a part of my life. And so that transition was a tough one. And I think the things that went best about it were the ways that we made it gradual. So for example, my parents had always come to doctor's appointments with me and been involved in that. And they continued that at National Jewish. They even kind of stepped back in and were there to kind of help me and sort pieces through. And they might not be in the room while I was with the physician, but they were there to support. I also had, this was not by design, but the way my transition worked was a little bit of overlap. And so I went to the adult center, back to Children's, like, I'm not sure about this, back to the adult center, kind of back, So I had like kind of overlapping appointments. And I feel like now that's baked into how things are done, but feeling like it was a bit more gradual felt really helpful. And like I had control. So after college, I met my now husband in college, and we got married shortly after college. We just had our 17-year wedding anniversary. And the piece about marriage, I think, is that CF can really impact sense of self and identity. You know, who am I? Am I a burden on others? Am I a light for others? Am I, you know, how do I fit in with me and me as CF with a relationship? And I'm really lucky in that I met a man who CF was essentially not ever an issue for. And he has been so integral in my coping as I've gone into adulthood and figured out how that looked like in this phase of life. But I remember our first date was a cross-country skiing hut trip. And I remember I called him the night before, and I hadn't told him I had CF, but you're like skiing into this hut with a lot of medical equipment. And I had met with my CF team and they were helping me figure out how to manage it. But I was like, I have to tell you just like this little thing. It's not a big deal. Kind of it. I don't know. And I was like, you know, I have this thing called cystic fibrosis, and I'll bring my meds. And I kind of gave him the scoop, and he was like, sounds great. Okay, awesome. That sounds good. Like, is there anything else you want to tell me? And it was so not an issue that I was like, oh, how's this going to go? But it was great. I mean, and we're still together, obviously, and he's learned a lot more about it now. But I think having a partner who's fully supportive and has seen it as it's just part of me, and it doesn't make me. I've never felt like a burden with him, which I think is huge. So then career, I'm a psychologist, as I mentioned. I think the piece that I want to highlight about career, I think that CF also kind of gives you, there are superpowers that you can get from it. And I mean, I have boatloads of empathy for people dealing with health stuff. Like when people are like, doctor's appointments are long, I'm like, oh yes. You know, it's not fun to not feel well. Oh, I get that. And so it's not an accident that I'm a health psychologist, because now I work at Denver Health and I work with patients all the time who have, you know, a myriad different health issues. And I really think my empathy is a superpower. So I think that this is where obviously CF is hard in a lot of ways and brings challenge, but I think also you can see ways that it helps you appreciate the world in ways that people who have not dealt with health issues, you know, that they can. Babies. So after becoming a psychologist, I decided that Christian and I decided that we wanted to have kids, and I had always known this. It took a long time for me to get pregnant, as it did at that time for many women with CF. Honestly, with the new CF modulators, it's a different deal, but got pregnant and then found out I was having twins. And that at the time, I remember, you know, this was like the most carefully thought out decision. I was being managed by a high risk OB even before I was pregnant. I was at a fertility clinic, and they were carefully monitoring to make sure that I only ovulated one egg and all of these things. This was like the science of starting a family, not perhaps the magic of starting a family, but with CF, you kind of know a lot about the science of everything in terms of how life goes. And there were like some case studies on women with CF carrying twins, but not a lot more. So I think that this just really makes me think about, I was so grateful for the care team that I had at the time, because they helped me feel secure and safe, and, you know, make sure I was really carefully monitored and had what I needed to be successful with my pregnancy. And I gave birth to 2 healthy twins. I had to be induced because I went to full term, and they were great. They did not have to be cared for in the NICU. They were with me in the hospital. So they were total miracles. Which, speaking of miracles, Cftr modulators. So shortly after Tommy and Lucy were born, about a year after, Orkambi was getting studied. And I entered into a clinical trial for Orkambi. And although it was a double-blind study, it was abundantly clear pretty quickly that I was in the drug category, was on Orkambi. and ended up having such a profound response to it that I had the cool opportunity to go and testify at the FDA hearing in support of it being approved. It literally changed my life in terms of giving me stability that I'd never had before and restoring my body to a healthier place. And then I was on Orkambi for years and then went on Trikafta. And again, like these are two drugs that have literally, they're like the miracles that I feel like I and my family had waited for my whole life. My sister's also on both and doing really well. But they have been complete. Trikafta in particular has been a complete game changer. I did not have any side effects at all to Orkambi, which was kind of shocking. I have had some side effects to Trikafta, which I'm happy to talk about if people are curious about. But those are so far outweighed by the benefits of it that it is not even a decision of whether or not I stay on it. And I literally refer to it as my miracle drug. I'll be like, oh, hold on. Let me wait to take my first bite of dinner. Let me go grab it. So with that note, I'm going to show a quick video. So I mentioned that my family's always been really involved in CF fundraising, and there's a fundraiser that we've actually, I started going to it when I was 6 or 7, and we've gone every year. It's in the mountains. It's a ski event. It's hosted by American Airlines, and it benefits the CF Foundation. And they do a video every year, and my sister, myself, and another CF patient, Piper Beatty, are all like the CF ambassadors for it. So I'm just going to show my video because it's kind of, I think, fun to see in a different way. And then we'll just chat. This is the part when I hope technology works. Let's see here. Here we go.
Where's little Buffy? That's the trail. Just ran up here from my house. Super steep hill. Oh my. I mean, look at this side.
Uh-oh. Okay, I'm gonna let it load for just a moment. It looks like it's needing a minute. We tested this before. Oh gosh, this is when the screen is not frozen in a position that I'm thrilled about. Okay, let's try it again.
Oh my goodness. I feel so unbelievably grateful. My name is Samantha Monson. I am 40 years old. I have cystic fibrosis. I am a mother to 9-year-old twins, Tommy and Lucy. Right, guys, have a good day. I'm a social psychologist, and I have a wonderful community of friends and family, and I live a life that I absolutely love. Growing up, I can remember in my childhood room a sign that read, "Miracles happen." I have so many memories of following to that sentiment, and now as an adult, fully feel like I am living amidst miracles. Christian is one of my first miracles. We met when we were just 18, just babies, and now we've been together 22 years. He is the most supportive partner, also way more fun with me. He does a lot in me. We ski, we hike, we mountain bike, we rock climb, and all of these things make our life rich. I also feel like I have been the recipient of miraculous medical science and medical breakthroughs. A couple of years ago, started a medicine called Trikafta, which has literally changed what it means for me to have CF. I am healthy, my lungs are healthy, my body's healthy. And I've even been able to start scaling down on some of the things that I need to do to maintain my health. So I'm able to substitute one of my airway clearances a day for a run. And although I still do that for a treatment twice a day and take many pills, my body is healthy and it's responding. I'm so baffled. Like, I take these little pills and they change my biology so that I feel healthy in a way that I never have. Cftr got developed because of the donations and the fundraising efforts of events like Celebrity Ski and people like the Celebrity Ski family. And I want every single patient to have that. Here I am up on the mesa again. Another run. Absolutely gorgeous morning. There aren't any days off with CF. And that is one of the things that is so important for us to keep working for. Even for patients like me who are so incredibly grateful for the miracle that is this new medicine, we still work really hard for our health. And having more freedom and flexibility and less burden would be yet another miracle that we know is on the horizon. And until then, I'll be up running on this mesa and working hard. Every CF patient has their mesa they run up to, their way that they're working hard. You know, there's more miracles on the horizon. And for that, we're truly grateful. I want my Celebrity Ski family to know that it is because of you that I am living out a miraculous life full of things that I absolutely treasure. My kiddos, my husband, my family, my friendships, adventures, quiet moments, and everything in between. I am so grateful for the way that your generosity has made scientific breakthroughs possible that I get to live every day.
So that's me. And those are some of the nuggets. I hope that some of these things resonated, and I would